Mr. Rabinowitz, I think you're going to lead off. I understand that council have consented to the admission of the expert's report, and I think we'll begin with your cross-examination. Morning, Rabbi. Mr. Rabinowitz, I believe the expert report is found at tab 4C of the material. Is that correct?
The alleged expert's report, yes.
Oh, okay, Mr. Rabinowitz.
I solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
May it please the court, my lord, Rabbi Torczyner, learned counsel, Mr. Shapiro, my poor client. Rabbi, I have reviewed your impressive resume, and I don't intend to spend any time dealing with your undisputed credentials.
Well, that's a relief.
But I take it that you would agree with me, sir, that you have no formal training in the legal analysis of public policy or constitutional issues involving the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
That's correct.
Fair statement. I take it then your report cites the importance of preserving cultural minorities in order to promote multiculturalism. Is that a fair statement as well?
Yes.
The question that I want to ask you is a hypothetical question, not found in our fact situation today. But say that my client had married a Jewish person, someone indisputably of the Jewish faith, and I take it that you would agree under that very simple scenario, your understanding, and I'm not asking you from a legal perspective, but your understanding in your capacity, I suppose, as an expert witness, that my client would in fact then be entitled to a share of the residue of his late father's estate.
Well,
if he was married to a Jewish person on the date of his late father's death.
Is there a clause to the contrary in the will? I'm not sure what you're asking.
Well, I take it you've looked at Article 3.4 of the last will and testament.
Yes.
In question.
So you're asking within the context of this will? Absolutely, yes.
Yes, okay.
Okay.
The question that I have is, what if my client's Jewish wife came from a famous Hasidic family, but sadly, and heaven forbid, had fallen off the track, so to speak, in terms of Jewish observance, and was someone who ate cheeseburgers on Yom Kippur, never attended synagogue, did not observe the Sabbath. Surely in such a scenario, you wouldn't think that that person would be someone likely to be preserving the Jewish cultural minority in the way that you discuss in your report.
Since my understanding of the validity of the clause, and it's my understanding, is predicated on Canada's Multiculturalism Act, which doesn't distinguish between one member of ethnicity and another one, and what they do with their ethnicity and how they live up to it, I would presume it would still be just as valid.
And that person is less likely to, that hypothetical wife, we'll call her the Yom Kippur cheeseburger wife or spouse, wouldn't be in a position in your estimation if you had to predict. Of course, the Talmud, as you cite in your report, tells us we can never know and predict what offspring we might generate and what they might do and what great things they might achieve. But you would think that such a person wouldn't be the likely candidate to be promoting Jewish continuity in the sense that you would like to see it.
Right, but it's not germane to the clause or to the will.
Right.
Yeah.
So you would agree with me, of course, that if the will provided that my client couldn't inherit if he was married to a different racial minority, you would agree with me in that situation, that's not something that would be consistent with promoting Jewish continuity.
Right.
And it would offend even your notion of public policy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And your report agrees that racial discrimination would not be justifiable.
Absolutely.
But in your view, Rabbi, religious discrimination is acceptable, isn't it?
Religious discrimination, no. Support of Canadian public policy promoting diversity, yes. I would draw a line between that.
So as long as it could be rationalized by a notion of continuity of the Jewish community, then discrimination based on a religious designation would, in your view, be justifiable.
I think that's what I've read of Canadian public policy, that discrimination which favors the whole by providing material benefit to a minority is considered good Canadian public policy. The promotion of diversity, the encouragement of minorities to continue to perpetuate their identity is considered to be good for Canada as a whole, and therefore, yes, much as the service to Aboriginals and other examples I gave in my expert report.
And if I changed the fact situation one more time, so in contrast to the Jewish cheeseburger spouse that I gave you previously, if my client had been married to a Gentile who had converted to Judaism, but the conversion process was via a reform or conservative, under the auspices of a reform or conservative rabbi. No ritual bath, no commitment to the observance of kashrut or the Sabbath or the Torah commandments. And say that my client had been married to this Gentile woman for decades, and she had changed over time, just as the late Mark Shapiro had changed in his lifetime. You recall reading that in the affidavit, describing the change in Mark Shapiro's lifestyle. So imagine this spouse had herself changed, and imagine that she became a Ba'alat Tshuva, so to speak, and became observant. Indeed, say she became more religious, spiritual, and observant than Janet Shapiro or Janet Schwartz. Strictly kosher, observing all of the holidays, the Sabbath, insisting that her children attend fine Jewish schools, including Yeshiva University. In that case, you would still say, under your analysis, too bad, too sad. Unless the Orthodox arbiter concluded and determined that the standards for her conversion were acceptable by Orthodox standards, she would not be considered a Jew. And in such a case, my client wouldn't inherit, would he?
I mean, that's not within the parameters of my expert report. I only touch on it briefly in terms of defining certain and saying that because it identifies a particular authority, that authority will apply his own standards. I think the Rabbi of Shari Shemayim is identified, and as a backup, Rabbi Herschel Schachter of Yeshiva University. So they're the ones who will determine what their standards are. But it's indeed possible that they'll decide that someone who has Jewish practices without what they view as Jewish conversion would not be Jewish.
So in my scenario, the Jewish cheeseburger spouse scenario, my client would inherit, but in the scenario where he had been married to what was a Gentile who had converted, but not by Orthodox standards, and had become extremely Orthodox and observant, my client would not inherit.
All right, so again, that's a possibility depending on the standards of the person who's supposed to be the arbiter, keeping in mind that Canadian public policy is not particularly concerned with a person's level of religious observance. It's simply concerned with the continuity of the minority's existence. What the Canadian government cares about is the perpetuation of a minority that can claim that 43% of their membership, so to speak, have advanced degrees, bachelor's degrees, or higher compared to 16% of the population as a whole. They want a minority that's going to bring its own particular flavor, its own unique element to Canadian life. They don't care about whether someone is religiously observant or not.
And thank you, Rabbi. Your view is that, and I quote from your report, actions to promote the marriage of Jews to other Jews are critical to the survival of the Jewish minority. You recall
Correct.
that
Yes.
in your report? We see from the affidavit evidence that Mr. and Mrs. Shapiro, as they were raising their children, they led a secular life, raised their children in a non-observant, non-religious home. You recall seeing that?
Yes.
After Janet met and ultimately married her Orthodox husband, Abe Schwartz, that's when Mr. Mark Shapiro, the deceased, made the change in his life, made his home a kosher home, and I think according to the undisputed evidence in the affidavit material, attended prayers at synagogue on a daily basis. So we see that people can change, can't they?
Yes.
And sometimes, Rabbi, you'll agree with me that it's a change for the good, and sometimes, unfortunately, it might be a change for the bad.
People change in all sorts of ways.
The point is...
Mr. Rabinowitz, sorry, are you almost finished here?
I am. I've been given a note
Okay.
that I had 3 minutes left, but
Thank you.
if my Lord's watch is
That's
going
fine.
quickly, I'd be thrilled.
That's great. Maybe your last question here? And make it a good one.
If I may have a moment just to collect my notes and see if I have a good one left.
Would you like a drum roll? I can arrange that.
No.
Okay.
No. You'd agree with me that my client, Howard Shapiro, he has the capacity to change.
Certainly.
He may be observant. He may be spiritual. He may have a commitment to the continuity of the Jewish people, notwithstanding his decision to marry in February of 2012.
Certainly.
I suggest to you, Rabbi, that cutting my client out in this way, do you not agree with me that it would cause resentment, anger, and it might actually minimize the chances of someone like my client ultimately working towards the goals of perpetuating Jewish values?
It's a little bit beyond the scope of my role as expert here, but I tend to agree with you that this is not exactly what I would prescribe as the way to preserve Jewish continuity. I think that it's perhaps, aside from potentially being counterproductive, I think it's too little too late.
Because you'll agree with me, Rabbi, and I think I'm paraphrasing your words, punishment is not a good way to promote the marriage of Jews to other Jews.
If I didn't say it that way, I'm glad to take those as my words.
And indeed, Rabbi, I'll conclude with this by putting to you the proposition that presenting the benefit of a Jewish lifestyle speaks more powerfully than a financial carrot and a stick.
Agreed.
Those are my questions, my Lord.
Thank you. Rabbi, I just have one question. I read your report, and thank you very much. It was excellent. You write about the Jewish theory that that a son, you could shift inheritance away from a son whose conduct demonstrate that his children will have no chance of receiving Jewish values. Is there any moral obligation on the parent to advise the child, in your view, of the likely or the possibility of that disinheritance if they don't follow that conduct?
In other words, if I understand the question, what you're asking is, does a parent who plans to disinherit have to let the child know?
Right. Is there? Would you say that there's any Jewish moral obligation in that regard, or is that?
I would tend to think so. We're warned not to put a stumbling block in front of the blind, and I think that if you leave someone in the dark about something that's going to so materially affect their well-being, that would count. So yes, one would be obligated to notify. I would think so.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.